Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Heidi Shedler. I am the current president of the CCCA, the Canadian Corporate Counsel Association, and I'm proud to be joining you from Halifax, Nova Scotia, also known as Mi'kmaq, the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq. I also wish to acknowledge that this meeting is situated on the traditional territory of First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people from coast to coast to coast. We express our thanks that we are able to share this land with Indigenous peoples and support efforts to sustain a relationship based on respect, dignity, trust, and cooperation. We are so excited to be hosting more than 260 registrants for this program today. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this special presentation by the CCCA in partnership with Mondaq and sponsored by Lawyers Financial. Next slide, please. Many thanks to Lawyers Financial for the continued support, enabling us to further amplify this report, the findings, and bring it to the state of Canadian in-house legal profession. We are so pleased to be presenting our third annual in-house counsel report, which would not have been possible without the participation of over 600 in-house counsel across the country and from all sectors and industry. It is because of your participation that we are able to provide an in-depth and insightful barometer of the in-house legal profession today. It is now my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today. Christine Staley is the Director of Professional Development at the CCCA, and Tim Hardy is the CEO of Mondaq. Christine and Tim will be leading you through the findings of this report. There will be time for questions at the end of the presentation, which can be submitted using the questions panel or function on your screen. We ask that you send in your questions to the organizers privately, and we will get to as many as we can during that Q&A period. Please send them as you hear them or think of them, and we'll tally them up. After the webinar, we will send each of you a link with the full 2024 report for your future use and reference. I would also encourage you to keep an eye out for both CCCA and Mondaq emails and bulletins, as many of the issues and concerns raised in this report will be looked at, discussed, addressed, and talked about throughout the year by both organizations through relevant professional development sessions, articles, templates, and tools that are going to be offered. So with that, I hand it over to Christine and Tim.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Heidi. And I would just like to echo Heidi's sentiments that I welcome all of you today. It's quite exciting to have such a large group from right across Canada joining us to hear about the findings of our third annual Canadian In-house Counsel Survey. So if we can just move to the next slide. So we have a short period of time to get through a very dense and data-driven full report. And we're going to try to do our best to get through all of the key areas. So really, here's our agenda for today. We'll go over the survey objectives and methodology and the participant profile. We'll also look at budgets and investment priorities, demand for in-house services, outsourcing, innovation technology, priorities and challenges, people and talent. And at the end of that, as Heidi said, we will leave some space for Q&A. So next slide. So before we jump into the actual findings of the survey, it's important to understand where this data and information was coming from. So in October 2023, we jointly with Mondaq launched our third annual Canadian In-house Counsel Survey, again with the aim of providing insights into the in-house counsel profession in Canada. Once again, we're proud to say that the survey stands out as the most comprehensive and representative examination of the state of the in-house environment. We had just over 600, I think it was 601 respondents completing the online survey between October and November. And this included 38 different questions that covered things like legal department activity, budgets, investments, outsourcing, HR and employee issues, things like that. We also had a voluntary self-identification section that consisted of 8 different questions, and we had about 2/3 of the participants completing that. And finally, to ensure that we did have the right questions, content, and findings presented, once again, we are very happy to have our advisory board look at all of the questions and the report to ensure that it is relevant and informative to you. So with that, we'll dive into some of the initial findings. So next slide. So participant profile. We are very happy to say that we have a very representative profile of those who completed the survey. So first off, looking at location, it is what we expect to have. Ontario being the largest body of participants is reflective of what our in-house community looks like. Coming after that, British Columbia, Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, others. And then we have a smaller participation rate in Quebec and New Brunswick. Again, what we would expect. Looking at organization type, this is always very interesting to me, and I always want to make sure that this actually is representative and reflective of who we know, at least within the CCCA, who our members are, and this is reflective. So government, about just over 30% of the respondents come from the governmental sector, which is very reflective of the CCCA membership. About 55% coming from corporate, almost evenly split between private and public companies. Then we have 8% at not-for-profit and charities, and then our catch-all group of others. Next slide. We also see a very diverse participant profile when we look at individual job roles and organization size. So again, this is what we expect, which lends more credibility to the insights we're about to present. So legal counsel at 33%, CLO, GC at 30%. It's worth noting that the category of CLO and GC is a significant increase from previous years. So we are getting more insights and more information from that top tier group. And then we have even distribution across the remaining job roles. Similar with organization size. So we have balanced distribution based on size, with about 37% of the organizations with up to 500 employees. 32% are about 501 to 5,000, and 30% with 5,000 plus staff. So with that, we'll move into the next slide and start to dive into some of the findings from our group of survey respondents. Tim?
Thank you, Christine. Yeah, thank you everyone for participating in the completion of the survey, also for joining the presentation today. There's a lot of data, as Christine mentioned, so don't worry too much about taking much of it in on this. We'll try and pull out some salient points and points of interest, and also points of difference across this survey versus the prior surveys, but you'll all get access to the full report, which has all of this information in it. You can look at that in more detail at your leisure. So let's start with the demand for in-house legal services. I don't think it would be a surprise to many of you that there is a continued, quite significant growth in demand for in-house legal services in Canada. Top areas of increased demands are around compliance, including data privacy specifically, and that number was 52% last year. So it's growth, more demand building on increased prior demand. So a lot of you will be familiar about that. Compliance, to look at some of the more classic areas of legal department interaction, like contract management and dispute resolution litigation, and then areas around supporting business strategy, business growth, and delivering of business objectives. And over the years since we launched the survey in 2021, there's been a continued focus on departments acting as the business partners. So next slide, please. I was about to change it myself. Thank you, Aaron. So you can see those areas I've just mentioned. Underneath them, there are other areas that you'd expect to see around supporting labor and employment matters, M&A, real estate. M&A actually contracted a little in the report this year versus last year. But yeah, those top areas very much are around continuing to support, legal departments continue to support their business, managing regulatory risk and also acting as a business partner for growth. Next slide, please, Aaron. Looking at what this means in terms of budgets and investment priorities, you know, I think it's fair to say that budgets and investments to a degree are looking to support the increased demand for in-house services. So while 5 in 10 legal departments across the 600 who completed the survey expect their budgets to stay flat, nearly 40% expect those budgets to grow. And a very small proportion expect to see their budgets contract. This growth is experienced across all the types of organizations that Christine introduced earlier. So public companies, private companies, government organizations, and not-for-profit. We did see, however, that the amount of public companies expecting to see growth has reduced from prior year versus the amount of private companies expecting to see growth has expanded. But when you just look at the delta between growth and decline, there's net a significant amount of growth coming. And next slide, please, Aaron. And a lot of that investment is really, and the increased demand is driving investment in additional technology and people, staff, resources. So this particular question looks across which legal departments are expected to see growth or decline, or across in-house staffing, technology, work being sent to outside counsel, and ALSPs. 2 areas expected to see the most growth by some distance are technology and people. Both of them are expecting to see 45% expect to see a higher spend on technology and on people. People came down just a little bit, probably because a few of them are expecting to increase their headcount growth, although it's still a high number of organizations that are planning to grow their in-house headcount. So 26% of respondents anticipate growth. But yeah, very, very clear investment in tech, and we'll show you in a little while what that looks like, and in people, partly through additional hiring and partly through, we believe, increasing remuneration to retain staff. Staff retention is obviously a key theme too. The line that has the sort of least difference, if you like, or that is the most challenged in terms of those organizations planning to spend more versus less, is around outside counsel, where, you know, while 35% are looking to spend more on outside counsel, there's a fairly big amount that are expecting a reduction in spend. So nearly 1 in 5. So I think it's pretty clear by the direction of spend growth that there's an expectation that this significant increase in demand for legal services will be primarily met via insourcing. So let's go to the next slide, please, Aaron. Thank you. Now, talking about outsourcing, and specifically outsourcing to outside counsel, in terms of the volume of work, so the previous slide we looked at was around spend and investment on outside counsel. In terms of the amount of work being sent to outside counsel versus not being kept in-house, the range is actually even smaller. So a middle graph shows you how many organizations across 2021, 22, 23 expecting to keep the same amount of work flowing to outside counsel. On the right-hand side, you can see those organizations expecting to send more versus less on the left-hand side, and there's not much of a difference between those. So, you know, 23% expecting to outsource more this year versus 20 expecting to outsource less work. So very, very narrow difference between what's going out versus staying in. Interestingly, the biggest difference by far, the biggest gap by far, was in public companies. And this is, I think, reflected in their investment growth as well, where public companies, just 18% of public companies are expected to send more work to outside counsel, whereas 26% are expected to send less. So there's a real driver there of or expectation that large public companies will be sending less work to outside counsel. And when you then look at the buy side value drivers of outside counsel legal services, I think there's some very, very interesting data there for consideration and for action. Let's continue looking at outsourcing. If you go to the next slide, please, Erin. The types of work, no great differences year on year here, right? So, I think these responses are fairly logical. These are the kind of work that are most likely to be outsourced to outside counsel. 71% if they're seeking expert advice in a new area to them. Transaction activities where one requires outside counsel assurance and opinions. Activities where there is not enough capacity. Of course, new areas of law, lots of mention of AI, Gen AI, ChatGPT in the free text answers this year. That would certainly classify as a new area of law, especially around the regulation of AI. And then where there's a real pinch in terms of a time frame within which work needs to be delivered. So those results have been constant pretty much since we launched the survey. But the value drivers for procuring outside counsel have seen some change. So let's have a look at those, Erin. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to look at the right-hand side of the chart first. The number of respondents who deem those aspects or attributes as important or very important. So legal expertise, no great surprise that 99% of legal departments value the importance of legal expertise. Practical advice rates very high too, as does client service and the understanding of my business. And those numbers have pushed up and become even more important over the last 3 years. But I think when you just look at the factors from the perspective of them being very important from a buy side value driving perspective, there's some real focus points there. So you look at the bottom left-hand side of the chart and you see how important the understanding of my business comes. That has had the biggest change in value over the years. And really beginning to, I think it's overtaken client service as a very important factor. It's still behind legal expertise and practical advice. Each of those 4 items year on year is gaining more importance. The understanding of my business is certainly coming out as probably the single biggest aspect that requires more focus. I would say that is backed up by other reports into the state of the North American legal markets. And indeed, I returned from the Marketing Partners Forum last year where there were some GC panels who spoke about this as being very, very important. So that is showing more and more through our survey results. Erin, next slide, please. This has all of the factors that we asked our respondents to rate against. So you can see those that I've mentioned as the top 4. At the top there, so legal expertise, practical advice, client service, understanding my business. The purple rating is very important, and the light green important. So value for money is still very important to clients. Unsurprisingly, I'm sure those conversations are being had a lot. Perhaps, and then there's sort of a big drop to what's deemed very important, the purple bits. Existing senior level relationships, brand and reputation, well below 20%. Outside counsel's EDI, also very small rating in terms of being very important towards outside counsel legal buying decisions, ditto investment in technology and innovation. But again, when you go into market, you hear anecdotally around the focus on existing senior level relationships. Clearly, those are very important and drive retention of business. But investing in tools and expertise to make sure on this legal services side, lawyers are very well tooled to understand their client's business is key. And I know we have a number of people dialed in the legal services and solutions industries too, as we all form part of this ecosystem. So some interesting data point there, I think. Erin, if you take us on to the next slide, please. In terms of other services that are outsourced, law firms continue to dominate the market for outsourced legal services. Very, very little growth in ALSP, alternative legal solution provider, over the three years we've been running the survey. So, you might have expected over that period of time there would have been a bigger increase, but there hasn't. So 13% of in-house teams use ALSPs at the moment. This is highest in public companies, but again, an indication of spend being pulled back in that organization type this year, because whereas 21% of public companies use ALSPs in 2022, that number is now 17%. Other services that are outsourced, e-discovery, translation services. So those are pretty important too, especially again in public companies. Most of that is staying onshore, so outsourcing within Canada. However, quite a big jump on last year to this year in terms of outsourcing these services outside of Canada. That number was 27%. So, a solid 500 basis point increase on that in a single year. So there might be options you want to discuss with your peers or review for outsourcing outside of Canada that could be helpful to your organization. Next slide, please. Looking at innovation and tech a little bit more, 60% of firms of legal departments are considering innovation as important in the legal department. A lot of mention in the free text answers around focusing on processes that involve AI and generative AI specific, as well as ChatGPT. And in terms of the word cloud, as that sort of graphics called, which automatically reports which words are mentioned the most in those free text answers, AI did not appear in that last year and has really come to the front, which is not a great surprise, but it is of very big interest, and you'll see it a little later in the survey results, actually of concern and considered a challenge to the way legal departments are working today. And then we'll look at that in a little bit more detail. Contract management, document management have been two areas that have had a lot of focus in terms of innovation of tools and processes over the years. AI is the one that now jumps out. Next slide, please. Thank you, Aaron. In terms of tech, well, obviously we know that the growth, the amount of legal departments expected to spend more on tech has increased. There is a small reduction in those who are prioritizing tech, and they mean slightly different things, of course, but 43% of legal departments are prioritizing investment in legal department technology. Still, significantly up on the first number we reported in 2021. And that movement of private companies investing more is indicated in the prioritization too, where 46% of private companies are putting a real prioritized focus on tech. Where's that money going? Unsurprisingly, because you saw a big increase in the demand for data privacy in-house services, that a lot of that is being met or supported by an increased investment in data privacy management. So nearly 40% of respondents are expecting to invest more in data privacy management. Document management is still a key focus, as the innovation slide showed too, as well as contract lifecycle management. Some areas that spiked during the pandemic, like e-signatures and workflow investment, have pulled back a bit because those investments have been made, right, and are almost BAU or are BAU in many organizations now. Looking on the next slide at a few other areas of tech where the money's going, and again, this is all available in the report. E-signature, as I mentioned, which is third from bottom there, did spike during the pandemic, and the areas that have had consistent sort of focus on investment and growth from the biggest proportion of organizations around document management, data privacy, contract lifecycle management, contract automation, and one area that we noticed actually have gone from a very low to slightly bigger basis around e-discovery. So whilst the numbers are still quite low in terms of it as an important area of growth, it has become more important for many more firms over the last 3 years. So next slide, please, Aaron. Looking at priorities and then challenges before I hand back to Christine to look at more of the people and talent aspects of the report. we asked the 600 respondents what their top business priorities. So not looking sort of at legal specifically. So, in my role, in my organization, what is my top priority? And supporting business growth came out as that top priority, which is reflected in other parts of the organization where more and more legal departments are seen as business partners to organizations. And of course, many organizations' key objective or primary objective is growth. Legal departments are being looked at to support that more and more. Risk management compliance always very, very high up because of the proliferation of risk and regulation that organizations need to get on top of. Of course, privacy specifically gets mentioned a lot. Tech, the role of AI within organizations, within legal departments is very important. We need to, I guess, do more to understand where some of those priorities lie, where some of those challenges lie, and we'll dig into some of these findings a bit more. But technology as a whole, including the recent developments around Gen AI, are taking up a lot of legal department bandwidth. If you go to the next slide, please, Aaron. Next 3 slides and my last 3 slides look at the specific question around the greatest legal challenge I expect to face in 2024. We'll look at CLOs and GCs response first, then legal counsel and senior counsel, and then boards of organizations. And there's some market differences between those. So you look at the view of the top of the legal department, so CLOs and GCs, compliance, regulatory change, privacy called out as a specific part of that, are collectively, clearly the number one challenge that GCs and CLOs are facing. There's mention of AI as well, which has come from nowhere. That did not feature in either of our first two surveys. ESG has come into the picture too, shows in some of the other parts of the survey. And then touching on sort of workload and staffing matters, is very much around compliance, privacy, regulation at the core of it. When you go, let's go to the next slide, please. And when you look at the view from legal counsel and senior counsel, often supporting the objectives and work of and programs of the GCs and CLOs, it's a completely different view, right? Workload just jumps out by a country mile as the biggest challenge. And you can actually see on the top left there, volume of work too. Yes, risk and privacy register, but it's a completely different perspective in terms of the challenge, right? It's like, oh my God, how am I going to get through everything I need to do to support the business? So that's definitely something for the leaders of legal departments to look out for. Then again, you'll see that technology and AI, those did not appear at all in the first 2 surveys we did. Those are areas of concern and challenge, both from the perspective we think, but we need to dig into this more, of regulation, but also how tools are being used within organizations. So definitely something for us to dig into as a sort of an ecosphere built around in-house legal departments. And then finally, from my perspective, when you look at the greatest legal challenges that boards expect to face, if you go to the next slide, please. More alignment between the board's challenges and the GCs and CLOs. We're not totally unsurprising. You'd want to see that. So regulation is really at the center of that. You see ESG mentioned again. Cybersecurity comes out for the first time. No mention though of AI and tech here as major challenges. So that's the one disconnect again, I would say, between the departments and the boards. Areas of focus around challenge, and then litigation comes out quite strongly too here, as you can see on the slide. So, I mean, in our view, certainly worth digging into some of this in your own teams and understanding more around the pressures being put on my workload. Christine's going to touch on that as part of the people and talent aspect of the survey, but also some other pressures and challenges being presented by AI and tech, and those are certainly new. So on that note, Christine, over to you.
Perfect. So next slide. Perfect. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and look at people and talent within the legal departments and dive into some of the findings for that aspect. So starting with equality, diversity, inclusion. So the big headline here is there is a continued lack of focus on EDI in legal departments. So although, this there were no new findings necessarily. I think what we can say is we were anticipating, or at least hoping, that we would find that there was an increased focus on EDI efforts, and that is not what we have found. So I think there remains a significant opportunity for legal departments and for the leaders within the departments to further prioritize and deliver ED&I initiatives. So of the nearly 600 respondents, 39% stated that ED&I is not a priority in the legal department. This is actually an increase on last year's 35% and the highest number that we've had in the 3 years of the survey. The lack of priority on ED&I was reported most widely by senior members of legal departments, where about 45% of CLOs and GCs stated that it wasn't a priority. And please note that this is compared to 37% in 2022 and 39% in 2021. So we've gone from the high 30s to 45%. Saying it is not a priority. And this should be quite concerning for the in-house counsel as a whole, and something for us to look at. And specifically when we're talking to the leaders within the departments, as you are most likely the ones responsible for the hiring, composition, and workflows within your departments. We also see that there's discrepancies in the results based on location. So for instance, respondents from British Columbia, about 72% felt that ED&I was a priority for their departments, compared to about 67% in Alberta, Manitoba being at the lowest with 44%. Sentiment also seems to be closely tied to the type and size of organization. So the highest rate of negative response was in private corporations, with 53% noting it was not a priority, compared to 37% in public companies, and even better, it's 33% in not-for-profits and 31% in governments, which shouldn't be surprising within not-for-profits and government. We also saw significant discrepancies based on organizational size, and this is something that we did talk about last year as well. So in organizations with 5,000 plus employees, 70% of respondents said it was a priority. Where if we look at the organizations with 500 employees and less, it's about 55% say it's important. So obviously budget, size of organization has a lot to do with where diversity falls within priority. So if we can move to the next slide. Perfect. So one of the things that we wanted to look at was some of the diversity data that we received from the self-identification. So as I had noted, we had about 2/3 of people voluntarily provided the self-identification information. We saw that we are a gender diverse group. 61% identified as female, 38% identified as male, and also age diverse. So 49% between ages of 25 to 44, 30% 45 and 54, and then 22, 55 plus. But where we are less diverse, specifically with regards to respondents of our survey, is race and ethnicity. So 79% self-identified as Caucasian, with Black, Chinese, and South Asian respondents comprising about 4% the total. Again, this is something that we will be looking at to see why are we not moving the needle? Where can we, with the survey, look at how the survey gets out, how we increase the respondents in some of these other areas. But I would also note that this is an area for leaders within the in-house community to look at this as well. Where can you move the needle? Okay, if we move to the next slide. Perfect. So moving into remote and hybrid working. So remote hybrid working is here to stay. It doesn't seem to be going anywhere, even with our post-pandemic lives starting to return. However, even though most organizations are still allowing employees to work remotely or in a hybrid situation, more are mandating office days. So the survey indicates that about 82% of Canadian in-house legal departments are operating within a hybrid model. And you can see the breakdown here: 86% public companies, 68% private companies, and 88% of government organizations. And 21% of those, though, are mandating no days at all. 10% of law departments are now mandating 1 day, 29% are mandating 2 days, and 35% are mandating 3 days. So it'll be interesting to go back to your own organizations and see where do you fall within this scale. So even though there is a shift towards expecting people to come back to the office for a few days a week, hybrid and remote working is still here, and most organizations are still providing that opportunity for their employees. And next slide. Okay. Workloads, workflows, and the amount of work on your plate. So as Tim said, we are still seeing that as a concern, as an issue, as a priority. And it is evident that in-house counsel are carrying significant accountability beyond their legal responsibilities, with over 40% of in-house counsel also responsible for compliance. 1 in 4 are responsible for ethics, 22% for investigations, and 19% of in-house counsel are stating that they're also responsible for government relations. Where we're seeing an increase, as Tim had noted, is within the ESG realm. So we went from 8% in 2021 and 14% today. So a huge increase of in-house counsel that are now saying that they are responsible for ESG. In public companies, investor relations are also frequently added. Much of these additional tasks are centered around the CLOs and GCs, with 61% saying that they're responsible for compliance, 34% at ethics, and so on. 1 in 5 GCs and CLOs are saying they are responsible for ESG and government relations. We are, that said, even though I did focus on CLOs and GCs, we are seeing the other senior levels of counsel being responsible for these items as well. So moving to the next slide. So with that, and with these increased responsibilities and accountabilities, it is no surprise that stress and anxiety is still on the rise. We continue to see high levels of anxiety throughout the in-house counsel community. 50% of respondents have said that there is an increase in stress and anxiety, while only 10% have reported a decrease. And it's important to note that this 50% increase is on top of an already highly stressed employee base. So you can see in the slide here, 48% in 2022, 71%, that was us in our pandemic phase, reporting that there was increased levels. So we definitely have a long way to go here. The increased level of work-related stress and anxiety is noted as highest within the CLO and GC level, up from 49% to 54%, and the director and legal services, so at that higher level within the legal departments. We are also seeing anxiety levels by organization type is quite similar within the corporate sector, but all types of organizations and all the legal departments are obviously dealing with this and need to find solutions and opportunities to work with their employee base to decrease the stress and anxiety. Next slide. People and talent. Moving on to the key skills, this should come as no surprise. It is always the top of skills required of in-house counsel is communication. We hear this year after year. And we hear from our members all the time that this is where they're struggling as well, as how to communicate across, down, and up. Coming in at number 2 is understanding the business. We are seeing this as an increased priority, is really having that foundation and grounding within what the business does, what the strategy is, and how to move that forward. And then 3, flexibility and adaptability. And I think we all as lawyers understand this. We do not want to be known as the department of no. So learning to be a bit more flexible, to be adaptable, and to help the organization move things forward and come up with those solutions and not the no answers that they may expect from us. So there are a lot of opportunities for us as in-house counsel to develop these skills and to turn into the business leaders that the organizations are looking to us to be. And then finally, just looking at non-legal roles. So we had asked this question in the last few surveys as we were seeing people move from a traditional in-house counsel role to other roles within the organization. So some of the roles that we're seeing is COO, compliance, general management, strategy. Most of the moves to the non-traditional roles are in those areas that you're already holding accountability and responsibility for. So we're not seeing any huge surprises happening in someone taking on, the chief marketing officer or anything like that. We're seeing the shifts into those roles or into those areas that you're already probably working in. We have seen a slight decrease in these moves into other types of roles, but not on a significant level. Okay. And next slide. That is from both Tim and I, kind of a very quick, high level look at some of the findings and the data from the survey itself. There's a lot more that can be looked at and you can dig into, and as we said, we will provide the survey so you can dive into some of those numbers yourself, so please don't worry about all of the stats and percentages we're throwing at you today. You will have lots of time to go through this. So I guess I will hand it over to you, Heidi, if there are any questions.
Thank you so much, Christine. Thank you, Tim. Really appreciate you taking the time today to fill us in on all the great information that we've garnered from this survey. We do have one question. I think this one will be going to you, Christine. Regarding the EDI stat, does the quote-unquote importance metric mean important to their own in-house team or important when hiring outside counsel?
Tim, I don't know if you want to talk about the question or can I?
It's the question we asked, Karen, is equality, diversity, inclusion deemed to be a priority in my legal department? So this is inward looking in terms of that specific question. There is also a question that was separately asked around when legal departments are looking to hire outside counsel, how important they rate their outside counsel's own EDI program or profile in terms of hiring outside counsel. But this question specifically that you asked about is how important EDI is deemed to be in my legal department. So hopefully that clarifies that aspect.
And I just wanted to add on to that, because Heidi and I were actually having a discussion before we started the program today that I thought was quite interesting to look at, and something I think for CCCA to delve into a bit more is, as Tim said, this was an inward looking question. So is it a priority for your department? What we don't know is it a priority for your organization? I think, a lot of us would say most organizations say it is a priority for them. It is a strategy for them going forward. And I think it might be quite interesting to see if there is discrepancy between what the priorities of the organization are for EDI and the legal department, and whether they match or not.
Thank you both. We have another question from Amico. Can you please explain why corporate secretary didn't appear as an additional accountability or role?
Yeah, I think we should add it in. It would have been put forward as an other. So we had a number of respondents who put forward other examples of additional sort of non-legal accountability, and where there are sort of oft mentioned, we update year on year our survey, and we should bring that in, Christine, so as an option, because there should be you know, quite a number of respondents who select that. I don't know, Christine, whether you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I would agree. It might be something that we add going forward, because it definitely was a priority and a challenge when we looked at some of the word clouds, looking at governance, especially, you know, now that we know that ESG continues to be a priority, obviously that has the governance component to it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have another question in the EDI category. And the question comes from Sandra, and she's wondering whether or not there was a nuance between how important EDI was to the person responding to the survey versus how important it was to the organization. And I know, Christine, that's something that you and I chatted about. Maybe you can expand on that a little bit more.
Yes, and I definitely think it was. We were asking that specific individual how they felt, EDI felt within their legal department, not how it stood within the organization. So I do think there was the numbers reflect what that individual is seeing and what that department might be prioritizing, or what they feel the department is prioritizing.
Tim, did you want to add anything, or?
No, I mean, I think one of the differences in our survey is that we seek input across different job levels, right? So when Christine broke down the participation, around 30% GCs, CLOs, so a big number out of that 600 from the top table, if you like, and then a really big number of legal counsel, senior counsel, and indeed a good representation from associate GCs, legal managers. The question therefore reflects the feedback across those levels, and indeed a number of the questions reflect feedback across the different levels. That insight, I guess, and that representative insight is very, very important, right, for the leaders of departments, and of course the leaders of businesses and organizations as a whole. So these things often are signals for us to look at something in a little more detail in our own teams, our own organizations, within ourselves sometimes, and see if there is any action that needs to be taken. Doesn't necessarily give the answer. There's definitely a strong signal there to be asking the question around, because you as a firm might think everything's great. I regard EDI as a massive priority. But if your team don't, and you're not actually seeing it, then there's a serious issue there, right? So it's just a signal for you to have a look closer to home, is what I'd say.
Great, thank you, Tim. We have another question from Julia. So she says, I know you do a comparative survey for in-house counsel, or compensation survey for in-house counsel, sorry, separate from this one. How do you currently do an analysis around compensation and workload, or how many other responsibilities in-house counsel have? So I know we delved into that a little bit in this survey, and what we heard is a lot of people are doing more with less effectively. and so, you know, Christine, maybe you can comment on that, about the nuance between the two.
Yes. So, and the question might actually be coming is, we are in the middle of the comp and benefit survey right now. So many of you have probably received an email from CCCA asking you to fill out a survey around comp and benefits, which we do every other year. That one is a more detailed look at the comp and benefit packages that each of you have. And we do a very detailed dive into province, sector, industry, seniority, titles, where we did not do that here. So this is not a deep dive into compensation. It also is not a, we look at percentage wise, where is your time being spent? With the comp survey, we're looking more just at comp and benefits. We do ask a little bit around workloads and stress, but more in terms of how is that reflective of what your compensation structure or benefit structure is. Where I think this takes a more individual approach, a more people-centered approach to it. How are you feeling? Where are your accountabilities lying? Where are the tasks at hand that you're being asked to do on a very personal level?
Yeah, and the only data point that I can, I guess, reference that relates to where the money is going, if you think that 45% of organizations are intending to spend more on people, on staff, and 26% are expecting to spend more on, expect to bring new staff in, there's also money going into existing staff. Where that's going to, and if you're not seeing that, then again, certainly worth digging into. But there's a chunk of additional money going into staffing in-house legal departments, partly bringing new folks in, but also in terms of investing in maintaining workforce and retaining staff. So yeah, worth looking at in your own organizations.
Thank you. So we have just a couple of minutes left, and I want to give you each an opportunity, frankly, to do a little bit of blatant self-promotion. And so I would love it if each of you could talk about what Mondaq and CCCA has to offer to in-house counsel in order to help them how to manage doing more with less.
I'll let you go first, Tim.
I can build on that. Christine, do you want to go first? Then I can build on that.
Sure. Yes, I can. Sorry about that. So for those of you who are joining that are CCCA members, you'll know that we offer various PD sessions, whether they're virtual or in-person events on a host of topics. They will, be anywhere from substantive updates to learning more about strategy. Actually, just the other day, we did one on understanding financial statements and budgets. So from nuts to bolts, understanding black letter law to understand how to read a balance sheet. These 1 hour programs, I think most people have gotten used to these virtual offerings, will just give you that quick information you need to get the templates, tools, information, and then get on with your day. I think one of the other things that I do want to spend a minute talking about is the piece around anxiety and workloads. And one of the things we are looking at doing right now is we know that your career satisfaction is highly connected to your connections that you make at work on a personal level, and they also impact your anxiety levels and your stress levels. And so one of the things we are also doing is incorporating more live events where in-house counsel can get together to network, to chat, and to make those connections, to meet new colleagues and just have sounding boards. So we have hosted multiple regional conferences last year, one in Vancouver, one in Toronto, and this year we will be hosting 2 more again in Toronto at the end of May, and we're coming to your town, Heidi, in November, going to Halifax, where not only do we have PD sessions, but informal roundtables to just discuss some of these topics that we've gone through today. We're also hosting smaller events. So on Monday, there's an event in Calgary, and it's a pure networking, come meet your colleagues, get to know each other. I would recommend anyone in Alberta, especially in the Calgary area, attend those events. We've got another one next week in Ontario. taking place. So, getting out there and meeting people can also help you do more with less. You don't need to have to, you don't need to try to find those templates on your own. Someone's got them. Ask. You don't need to deal with some sort of thorny ethical issue on your own. There are people out there that you can talk to, that you can get their thoughts with. So reach out. The last thing I just want to mention is, I would be remiss if I didn't mention our CIC.C, or Certified In-house Counsel Program. We've partnered with the Rotman School of Management and Business, or University of Toronto, to deliver an executive MBA style program specifically for in-house counsel. And again, it deals with most of these topics here. So looking at communication, at team management, workloads and workflows, strategy, governance. So all of those things that you would expect with an MBA, we delve into those things, and we're seeing that it's of huge importance, of increasing importance, to understand that business, to be adaptable, to be flexible, to be able to move the objectives of the organization forward on a business basis, not just a legal basis. So again, helping you to do more, to provide more value.
And clearly the CCCA is offering its members and the community a huge amount of value. Two things I would add to what Christine said around sort of Mondaq's focus. A lot of it is also supporting the CCCA and the CCCA members. The two things we really do a lot of is around knowledge, bringing information to Canadian In-house Counsel. That could be in the form of newsletters, our website, events, and we're trying to focus more and more on areas of change. So something like AI regulation that we know is causing a lot of, it's an area of great interest, but it's also causing concern. We're doing more in terms of providing information. So we have an AI newsletter that anyone can sign up to free that brings in all the thought leadership around that area. We will be putting on webinars and indeed virtual on topic too. So we really look to support you in Canada around knowledge and that aspect of your learning and development. And it was very interesting to see actually a lot of reference around priorities in terms of the free text answers, also around wanting to learn more around new areas of law. So we can help with that.
Can I actually just add one more thing, Tim? Because I think a lot of people probably don't realize there is an invaluable resource and tool on the Mondaq website, and I would encourage everyone to go on. It's their advice centers. Within the advice centers, you will find a whole host of templates, precedents, checklists, and other tools that get right to what Heidi's talking about, doing more with less. And I think that's sometimes lost. We think of Mondaq as just providing articles and webinars, but there is a wealth of information and, like I said, precedents and templates sitting in the Mondaq platform. And I would encourage all of you to go and take a look.
Thank you, Christine.
Well, thank you, Christine. Thank you, Tim. I really appreciate you taking the time today. And thank you to everybody who registered, asked questions, and were so engaged during this presentation. As Christine mentioned, you're going to be receiving an email with a link to the full report. And so we would encourage you to access that, share it with people, use it. It's all really invaluable information. So once again, would really like to thank Mondaq and Lawyers Financial for supporting us through this journey. Thank you very much, everybody. I hope you have a lovely day.